Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So this episode I'm calling Militaristic Poseurs, parentheses, Deadly Phallic Cultists, Flirt with World War over Ukraine and its alliances. So this is a simple reminder of the U.S., of the dominance in the United States of what I call the cult of the Deadly Phallus, which is a cult of militaristic posing of toughness, not necessarily related to war and not necessarily related to the commander-in-chief. I mean, it is that, but also it's something that goes through our society from individuals who are relatively powerless to start wars, on the ground, who are not political leaders, but who subscribe to this cult of toughness, the cult of showing bravado and threat through various threat displays, and including, the purchase of guns and the display of guns, and their various politicians on local and regional and national levels who think of this as their calling card. So it's something that's a shared I wouldn't say it's quite a psych. It can be psychotic, but it's a shared illusion and delusion that people have about what it means to be strong, what it means to be protective, and of oneself and other people. And so this posing, actually has real world consequences. So it can lead, and it does lead, to an enormous inflated military budget. So even though we are taught in some way, or we assume that posing or that rhetoric is insubstantial, in this case it's part of the hegemonic system of the United States government and also society overall, or what's the dominant form of being in our society. And so in that dominant form of being, dominant not so much as that everybody subscribes to it, but the people who tend to have power tend to be people who use this form of posing and form of bluff to intimidate other people, to claim for themselves social status, and anyway, and so it's also a particular so the Republicans are more at peace with this pose, in that it fits the cult of gun ownership, the cult of gun fanaticism that they have become to be the representatives of, and also supposedly, now this is where Donald Trump is introduced kind of a twist to it. Donald Trump specialized in this kind of phallic posing, and he also in relationship to political opponents, domestic political opponents, and so forth and so on. And on the other hand, on the international stage, he was a weird mixture of this kind of brutality, a brutality and an attempt to prove himself to be a strong man, and the other in other regards also when it came to other authoritarian leaders, he's someone who aspires to be an authoritarian leader. He was sort of lovey-dovey and uncomfortably and sickeningly amorous, but not necessarily in an adult way, in a way that's mature for a political leader, and is about alliance building or about peacemaking and so forth and so on, and disarmament and all this sort of thing. It was more a personal, love affair that he reported on in various, sometimes with Putin, sometimes with Kim Jong-un. And there are people who defend him and say, well, that was his form of peacemaking, and they defend him because they say, well, this is not typical U.S. militarism. But anyway, he was also a part of that same culture, and he grew up in it, and he doesn't have the resources or the instinct or the desire to dismantle it in any substantial way. But he did see he was part and is part of a kind of a neo-fascist international that is an alternative alliance system that also, in the world, that is an alternative to the existing alliances of liberal democracies, and also potentially very troubling. It's essentially the rebirth of something like an Axis power, set of Axis powers, in which the United States is kind of potentially, if the Republicans win again and with Trump at the helm, they could potentially be part of it rather than part of the liberal democracy alliance. But that's going down something of a rabbit hole. Trump is not president currently, but we have in place now an administration that is operating according to pretty much the old playbook, or the playbook of pre-Trump. And again, I'm not of the camp that Trump was a great anti-interventionist or an anti-imperialist at all. So just he was looking for he had an alternative form of imperialism, alternative form of alliance building with neo-fascists around the world. So anyway, the old style, cult of the Deadly Phallus in the United States is very tempting for Democrats to enact. And this is, unfortunately, it looks like Biden is ignoring the Ukrainians' own, and Zelensky, the prime minister of Ukraine's own analysis of the situation, and also pleas, and ignoring those pleas that they take a step back, because they're claiming that Russia is not imminently about to invade. That's a sort of, I was repeating, that's redundant. Anyway, so they're not about to invade, says Zelensky, and that the United States and the West should step back from their plans. And so it seems like the administration is following an old playbook, and the old playbook is Democrats feel like they have to show almost more than Republicans that they also possess this deadly phallus, that they also are, uncommonly cruel, uncommonly, or that they are not, they don't want to open themselves to the Republicans' attacks, which, not all Republicans are so Trumpist. That there's a split in the Republican Party between the pro-war faction and the sort of neo-isolationist, you could say, or neo-fascist faction, but not a peacenik faction, not a world peace, disarmament faction at all. So they're all this show, this tough guy or tough gal, it can also be tough gal, show or posing is something that Democrats feel like they need to do to hide or to protect themselves from the appearance of being, I'm using now here, primary process castrated feminine people, in other words. So not, and feminine, I'm using this as someone who values the feminine as much as the masculine, and it values the feminine being not something that is historical and necessarily associated with women, but I'm using a very cultural, I'm using as in our assumptions, in our gut instinct kind of associational way that we associate caring, compromise, talking rather than throwing punches or shooting bullets and so forth and so on, with supposedly womanly or feminine attributes, even though it goes with both, any sex can do those things and do them very well, and but for whatever reason, when I'm using this cult of the deadly phallus language, in part to make it sound ridiculous, which in some ways it is ridiculous. It's a fantasy about power and about who has a penis and who doesn't, and who's lost their penis and so forth and so on, that comes from childhood. Okay, that's literally something that we need to outgrow fast. Okay, and particularly now, given this standoff with an opponent, with Putin, who also has his own cult of the deadly phallus, who has his own flirtation with phallic masculinity, with shows of strength, with being essentially the dictator of Russia, through a managed democracy, not a true democracy, and he has ultimate power in Russia. Again, it's not a totalitarian society, but it's he is and he has to create a show of having elections and so forth, having an opposition. There you have Navalny coming in and trying to oppose him and so forth and so on. Navalny not being a particularly progressive individual at all. In fact, in some senses being as reactionary in some ways as Putin, or more so in some ways, but still in opposition, still someone who has some kind of personal sense of mission that he can do better than Putin, and maybe he will abide by more democratic rules, maybe, if he were to become president of Russia or something, or the prime minister. So, but anyway, we are looking at a system that our system should be more flexible as a nominal democracy, even though our democracy is in shambles. It's I'm not sure. I mean, Russia is less democratic than our country is, but by a good bit. But we are not nearly the most democratic country. I mean, we're probably 40th or 50th in the world, somewhere around there, in terms of our the level of the integrity of democratic institutions in our society. So nowhere near the top. Okay, and anyway, but in our system, we should be nominally more flexible than Putin. So we should be not pursuing a rigid policy of confrontation with him, but attempting to interest him in some kind of settlement or other that will keep Ukraine's independence and will reduce the prospects of war either between any number of the parties involved here. And it, unfortunately, the incentives in our system currently are that because of the dominance of the military contractors, and this is, so the cult of the deadly phallus is the sort of the soap opera that runs over the business end of our society. And the business end is the military-industrial complex continuing to dominate, as well as other corporations, not only the military-industrial complex, but continuing to have inordinate power over the spending of our government, and also then our policy that stimulates the demand for weapons of war. And so anyway, so now I'm not. There needs to be some element in this confrontation with Putin. There does need to be some element of a military, if not threat, at least a military. He needs to understand that there are some military options that we would be considering. Okay, so, but they shouldn't be the first ones. Okay, and that there should be and we shouldn't be quick. We shouldn't overstep what the Ukrainians are saying. I mean, if this is about national self-determination and democracy, we should never, ever be, in this case, unless we think Zelensky and the Ukrainian government is entirely incompetent. And that's the and can prove it and can show it to be the case. But that isn't something that's been shown, and that therefore they can't be trusted in terms of their, and why they would do that is like literally if they're about to be overrun and their entire system be transformed by Putin into some kind of client state, they would have every incentive to fake or to shade their reports to decide that where they would be defended from that outcome by some kind of NATO help or some kind of U.S. help or whatever. So and also, I mean, there's another unfortunate dimension to this is that Western Europe has become dependent or is dependent on Russian natural gas and to some degree oil, and that's a fault of the climate policies really and the energy policies of Western European or just European nations west of Russia, in that they could have turned more quickly. They could have realized years ago that depending on Russia on foreign just the same thing in the United States, same thing with any country, depending on oil is a stupid idea, and depending on the gas is a stupid idea right now. But then particularly if you don't really trust the government of the oil producing nation and they also have fairly substantial military capabilities, you don't want to be depending on them, but you want to have a program of energy independence in the sense of, and not depending on coal, but doing energy efficiency, and renewable energy and so forth and so on, which is something that should be at tops on the agenda for a rational politics in Europe, in the European community. But and they have some standards and so forth and so on, but they're not nearly maxing out on their capacity in any of those areas. So anyway, so we need to really be clear. I mean, I don't want my voice. I think I'm speaking, though people may not like my use of the word like cult of Deadly Phallus and so forth and so on. There is a ridiculous, immature show of bravado, okay, you can say, and illusions about toughness and so forth and so on. Someone needs to be, not beside myself, or more people need to be talking about how our ruling, the hegemonic system, the ruling assumptions, the ruling discourse in our country about force of arms, about international influence, about diplomacy, about military engagements, about the consequences of military engagements, all those things needs to be brought down to a rational level, a level of where we can protect the most people, including our own people, our own military, and also people abroad, and also encourage national self-determination in other nations, something that we haven't done or we only do it in a way that it furthers the interest of U.S. business. We don't do it or business or international corporations, let's say, and doesn't, whatever, multinational corporations or transnational corporations, and not the interest of people in different countries and their desire for self-determination. So, so there's a whole bunch of values that we sort of pay lip service to, but don't really implement. And then also we have this ridiculous culture of waving around arms, okay, and ridiculously, but dangerously, and potentially lethally, and that's not. I don't think it has anything to do with being particularly strong. In fact, I think it's a weakness in our society, a weakness of our inability to embrace the full capacities of human beings to be both fully masculine and fully feminine in ways where fully masculine and feminine don't mean having a male body or a female body, but being able to express all of the things that we divide into those two categories in intermingling ways that depend on the situation, that depend on what it was needed in terms of our human capacities, what is needed to, in our case, in our situation, or in the situation we're in now, to ensure human survival and human thriving for not just our people, the people of the United States and the people who live here, but for people all around the world. And so, and that's something that the way that we've grown up in the United States, and the way particularly politicians have been inculcated, it works against that. It totally undermines. It's not just wrong. It's actually destructive. So and it is kind of a death cult. So we got to get out of the death cult, and we shouldn't pretend the death cult is actually self-determinate, is democracy enhancing or promoting, or independence promoting, but it's just simply a bad business model that is predicated on death machines, on selling more death machines, and keeping and trying and also an imaginary ability to control events in the world, other countries, other people in other countries, that goes through many U.S. bureaucracies like the CIA and so forth and so on, and also the military, that they engage in, if not magical thinking, I guess, delusions of grandeur, basically, about the degree to which they can control other nations, or at least they make attempts to do that, and so basically what then it leads to then is that they can kill people, but they can't really control them. So their preference is to then, let's cause death rather than let these people be, let them be who they want to be in other countries, in countries, or in particularly black and brown people, but also, in some of the Slavic countries, or in the countries surrounding Russia. We want to somehow contest this, have some kind of a struggle or and I think there's a lot of new and imaginative thinking is required to really reframe and reshape this confrontation between East and West, or between, let's say, the Russian sphere of influence and the American / Western European sphere of influence, NATO sphere of influence. So anyway, I hope there were some ideas here that were, or ways of framing this that were interesting to you in this video, and please like it if you do like it, and also please react and with any comments you have regarding this topic, and I hope to see you in the next video.